But the problem usually is parents interfere with their adult children's lives without being invited to do so. And they need to realize that they have to stop doing that if they want to stay close to their children, because otherwise those kids are not going to want them in their life.
Hey everyone, welcome to Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. Join me, your host, Denise Gorant, as we explore the ins and outs of building healthy relationships with our adult children. Together, we'll speak with experts, share heartfelt stories, and get timely advice, addressing topics that matter most to you. Get ready to dive deep and learn to build and nurture deep connections with our adult children. And of course, when to bite our tongues. So let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bite Your Tongue, the podcast. I'm a little bit scared before I begin this episode, but also very excited. This is the last episode before all the December holidays. So hopefully, if you're seeing your grandchildren or your adult children, this episode should be really helpful. Today, we're speaking with Esther Wojcicki. I read online if there was a Nobel Prize for parenting and education, it would be awarded to Esther. Who is Esther? Well, the reason I'm a little nervous is she's the author of the best-selling book, How to Raise Successful People. Sometimes she's actually called the Godmother of Silicon Valley, having raised 3 enormously successful daughters. Now, when I say enormously successful, get this. Her first daughter, Susan, was the CEO of YouTube from 2014 to 23. Then there's Janet, a professor of pediatrics at the University of California, San Francisco. And finally, Anne. She's the co-founder and CEO of 23andMe. Esther herself is also the co-founder of TRACT, T-R-A-C-T. It's a student-directed online learning app, and she was just named Chief Parenting Officer of the Global Newswire Sesh. I'll provide links to all of this in the episode notes, but today we're going to talk to her about everything from parenting advice for younger children, since there's still time with our grandchildren, and how she develops healthy relationships with her amazingly successful daughters. In essence, she says it's simple. It's an acronym, TRIC: trust, respect, independence, collaboration, and kindness. We have to start by talking to Esther a little bit about her background, because that will bring us full circle to how she developed some of these parenting techniques and her ideas. So welcome, Esther. This is such an honor to have you join us. Can you share a little bit more about your journey and tell us really, why are you referred to as the Godmother of Silicon Valley?
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here. I think the main reason I'm referred to as the Godmother of Silicon Valley is because I've had literally thousands of kids that have gone through my journalism program at Palo Alto High School, and they turned out to be really successful entrepreneurs or really successful professionals in one field or another. That's where the nickname came from. I was actually kind of surprised when it first happened, but I was then honored, very honored to have this. I think the other factor that contributed to it was my 3 daughters, because Susan was the CEO of YouTube and Janet, professor of pediatrics at UCSF, and Anne was the founder and CEO of 23andMe. All those stories have contributed to this title, and it continues because a lot of my former students are incredibly successful as CEOs, and I'm honored. Yeah.
It's really amazing. So I want to ask one question before we move forward. I read that one of the founders of Google, Larry Page and Sergey Brin, if I'm pronouncing that, rented your daughter's garage for $1,700 a month, Susan's garage. And she was working at the marketing department at Intel. And this led her to marrying Brin and becoming the 6th or 7th employee at Google. How did that happen? Did your kids associate with really bright people? How did they become friends with these guys that were starting Google? Why did she suddenly decide to rent her garage out to them? Because that was a big deal.
Well, it's a good question. And none of this was planned, I should just tell you. So Susan got married in August of, I think, 1998. when you get married, you're really busy thinking about your wedding and all the other things that are connected, and your dress and your cake and all these things. And so what they had done, her fiance and they bought a house. And it seemed like the normal thing to do. You're getting married and you buy a house. That's what happened. And she came back from the honeymoon. And what happened when she came back from the honeymoon was that she realized she couldn't pay the rent.
Or the mortgage, you mean, the mortgage, yeah.
She's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's like, oh, gee, reality set in, We all suggested to her, well, maybe a good thing for her to do would be to go over to Stanford, it's nearby, and, talk to her friends over there and see if there's anybody that wants to rent her garage. She could rent it. It was totally empty. The house was empty. They had one bed and a couch. It was pretty funny, actually. So she went over to Stanford and she met some people, and then she met some others. And then somebody introduced her to these two guys that needed to rent a space for their startup. And so she didn't know who they were, but she met them.
Gosh.
They seemed pretty nice. So she's like, sure, I'll rent my garage to you for $1,700 a month. That sounds perfect.
That kind of sounds expensive for back then.
It was a big garage.
Okay.
And they had a lot of stuff. And it turns out they didn't only rent the garage. They ended up renting 3 bedrooms downstairs and 2 bathrooms because the house was a 6-bedroom house.
Oh my gosh.
And so upstairs, there were already 3 other bedrooms. And the question was, well, why do you have to have so many bedrooms? It's just a young married couple. So they rented the rest of those downstairs areas to them too. And they put computers everywhere. They were in all the bedrooms. They were even in the bathrooms. They were in the garage. It was like wild. She never knew what she was getting into because there were more computers than she could believe.
I can't believe that. And then your other daughter ended up marrying.
My other daughter used to like to rollerblade, and they have a very long driveway at this house, very long, and it looked like a great rollerblading spot. So she would rollerblade around, and turns out Sergey also liked to rollerblade. And he noticed this cute girl rollerblading.
Oh my gosh.
And that's how it happened.
That's amazing. That's okay. So has nothing to do with this podcast, but I read it and I thought this sounded so interesting. I thought some of the listeners might want to hear about it, but we're going to move on now to more relevant stuff. And, the audience of my podcast is parents with adult children. There's lots of statistics nowadays. 25% of adult children are estranged from their parents. I'm sure you've been reading a lot of that.
Yes.
And I want to talk about this in 2 ways. One, the parents of the adult children are grandparents now, so they can use some of what you used with your children and the Palo Alto classroom or whatever. And also, I want to talk a little bit also about how some of the things that you've developed, because I read your book, and as I read it, thought some of this really relates to how we're treating our adult children. We've forgotten about it when they were little, and then we've taken it into their adult life too. I'm going to ask a couple pretty straightforward questions. Do you believe, and maybe it's 50-50, that there are parenting skills that help develop successful adults, or do you think genetics play somewhat of a role?
Well, I think genetics does play somewhat of a role, but in fact, the most powerful role is played by the parents. The environment, because it's nurture versus nature. And I do think that nurture is really important. The way you treat your child determines how they feel about themselves. And the more you do for your children, the less empowered they are. And this is one of my little phrases, and it works, because if you just think, if you always are doing things for your child, they expect help all the way. And it's you that has to help them because there's no one else out there doing it. And that was one of the principles of my class that made it work so well, and why I was able to have like 70 kids in one class, because I said to them, first thing you should do is try to figure it out yourself. Go to YouTube, look at some of those videos, search around on the web. If you still can't figure it out, then ask your friend, see whether they can help you. That still doesn't work. I'm always here for you. I'm a resource. But I want you to try to do it yourself, because You're not going to be taking me to college with you or your parents, and I am not going to go to work with you either. So you better figure out how to get that information.
And don't you see how that might relate to parents of adult children? A lot of parents are still too involved in their adult children's lives. And it sounds like they might be giving them that same message of, I'll do it for you. Okay, I'll help you get your mortgage, or I'll help you do this, or I'll help you do that. The adult children are even still not empowered. Could that be the case?
That's 100% the case. So, but also the other thing that happens is teenage years are the years when human beings want to be independent. Let's put it that way. I think it's kind of like flying out of the nest stage for humans. And a lot of parents don't like that. That's where the conflict comes,
because they want them close to them.
They want them close to them. And then they grow up to be adults, and the parents are still doing the same thing. And the kids are like, I'm an adult now. I can do this myself. I don't need you telling me or helping me. It results in conflict. And so what all these adult parents need to realize is, your influence, I'm sorry to say, it's over.
Say that again. You're right. It's over.
You did it already. You had 18 years to do it, and whatever you did, it's finished. And now it's their turn to do it. If they keep asking you for help all the time, that's not a good thing. I didn't want to pay that mortgage myself. You don't want to do it either. And you don't want to help them all the time. They have to learn to do it on their own. But the problem usually is the other way. Parents interfere with their adult children's lives without being invited to do so. And they need to realize that they have to stop doing that if they want to stay close to their children, because otherwise those kids are not going to want them in their life. So that 25% that you're talking about,
right.
That's what happened. They just were too pushy, too involved, telling their children they're doing it the wrong way. There is no absolute right way to do anything. As we know, there's like millions of books out there, and a lot of them talk about just the opposite thing.
Contradiction. Mm-hmm.
Contradiction. And so they need to do what Ruth Bader Ginsburg said. I don't know if you know what she said. She says, pretend you're a little bit deaf. Don't listen to all that stuff. Don't respond. Calm down. You cannot do everything for your kids.
I've watched all her, documentaries, movies, read a lot. I don't remember that. So that's a great phrase and perfect for this podcast. So I really appreciate that. It's really interesting. I want to talk a little bit about your challenging upbringing. You grew up in a tenement in New York's Lower East Side, and we were talking about nature versus nurture. It sounds like your nurture was not, it sounds like you were loved, but the rod was used quite a bit. You knew that you were not going to do this with your kids. How did you know that? And how did you sort of come up with that whole concept as a young person?
Well, as a young person, as a young child, age 10, I had that tragedy in my life.
Your brother, yeah.
My brother died. And he died as a result of my mother being afraid to ask a question, afraid to challenge a doctor when he gave her contradictory advice. As a result, it's a tragedy that, if she just would have asked the question, just would have taken this baby into the hospital to have his stomach pumped, he'd be alive today.
Wow. So
as a 10-year-old, I thought to myself, I am never going to let this happen to me or to my children that's why my focus is in class as a teacher. I want to teach you to think. I don't want you to be dependent on other people all the time. I want you to be able to figure it out yourself. And in today's world, you can get that information at your fingertips. You can get it on Google. You can get it on ChatGPT. Just type it in. All the information comes. So you don't have to be so reliant on other people. Most kids graduating from high school today, I'm sorry to say, they don't trust themselves. They don't trust that they can do it on their own. And it's part of the problem with the education system. They feel that they always need to have somebody help them, somebody tell them what to do. That's why a lot of them today are depressed. Did you look up the rates of depression?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Because they graduate, they go off to college, they feel like they can't do it. People don't like them. I'm not pretty enough, all this stuff. And then they they feel like they can't do it. My goal as a teacher was to teach kids to think and to believe in themselves and to be able to answer those questions that they had themselves. They don't have to run off to get some expert. That's what I think made all those kids so successful.
So let me ask you a question. Let's say I'm a parent of adult children. I am, but I'm talking in general, okay? I did coddle my kids because you talk about coddling and, different things that I read, and I did too much for them. I mean, you see a lot of this. Even now, I watch parents of high school kids running their book to the school when the kid forgets it, or, all these different, that's the smallest part of it. But so I've done all that. You read a lot of things about parents being involved, even in their kids' college. Let me read your paper in college. Let me review your college application. You sent that without mom editing it. I mean, I hear this kind of stuff all the time. So now they've done that through college. Now the kid's a young adult. How can a parent now realize what they've done and pull back? What advice would you say? I mean, the kids now used to this. Maybe their expectations is that the parent's going to swoop in at all times and solve it, or they're angry when the parent comes in and that causes the conflict. Are there any phrases or ideas or anything you have that might help?
Well, so the main thing that I think it would help is for them to have a discussion, talk about it with their children. That's number one. They can both get a copy of the book. The book's online in all these versions.
Right.
And read it together and then talk about it. Talk about why this trick formula that I have in the book.
We're going to talk about that soon. Go ahead.
It's so important for children, but it's especially important in all relationships, adult relationships, parents to children, spouses, everybody. No one likes to be in a relationship where they're not trusted. And that's the first thing. No trust, no respect, no relationship, as far as I'm concerned. That's one of the things that goes on. And unfortunately, in a lot of those parent-child things, there is no trust and no respect. You don't respect your child. You're like, oh, they're still kids, even though they're 35. They're not just kids, they're adults. We have to remember that. And so that's one of the best way and the easiest way is to just talk about it and understand what they might have done that created the problems. And now they're going to try a new path and see how it works.
I think that's a really good idea. The idea of reading it together is really good.
Yeah,
really good.
It does work. It really helps a lot. In my classes, my students said that they wanted their parents to read the book.
Interesting.
And it was interesting. And a lot of them gave their parents the book for Christmas. It made a big difference in the lives of a lot of kids. As you remember reading about that terrible scandal they had of the parents, the admissions, the tutor that was erasing the grades and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, that was in Palo Alto, which is where I am.
No, I remember. Oh, it was at that high school too.
At Palo Alto and Gunn High School.
Gunn High School. I remember that. Yeah, that was just horrific. I wish that would have given parents more of a wake-up call, because I think sometimes parents see their children as a reflection of themselves. So if the child isn't doing what they think their friends or family or whatever are going to see as successful, then they try to get in there and use their tools. They think they're going to change it. Does that make any sense?
That's right. That's exactly what's going on. And that's why when a child does poorly on something, the parent has an emotional reaction because they identify. And that's why you need a teacher, because a teacher is not emotionally connected. Mm-hmm. They can teach you something. The child can repeat and learn it slowly, and no one's going to get mad at them. But the parent has this unfortunate, recollection that they might have failed at the same thing, and that their kid is not going to fail. And so they put a lot of pressure.
So I'm going to get to trick in a minute, but I want to ask two other questions. One of the things I hear a lot from my listeners is this whole failure to launch. The kid's still living in the basement, or the kid got a job and then quit the job, can't keep a job, all these kinds of things. What role do you think the parent should play in those kinds of situations? Or do they have a role?
You know what? Those situations are the ones I'm trying to avoid with the way you treat your child to start.
Right.
Because if you're already there, it's tough.
It's tough, yeah.
It's really tough. What it shows is you have been doing this for their entire life. Now all of a sudden you want to change, and it's hard, and they don't understand why. But that's why I'm saying what they can do is read the book together. And then after that, you have like 3 months to get your act together and move out, and then you're moving out. You just have to throw them out. Sorry to say. They will hopefully, not do anything like alcohol or drugs.
I know, it's so hard.
It's just terrible. So one of my granddaughters is volunteering in this homeless situation in San Francisco. I said, well, why are all those people homeless? She meets them and then, I don't know, helps them set up their phone or whatever. The thing that's really sad about it is that most of those people, almost 90%, are drug addicts. A lot of them became addicted to drugs by accident. They just thought they would try it. So this is kind of a warning to everybody, don't try it. Don't try marijuana, don't try heroin, don't try cocaine, don't try anything. None of those are good. And apparently even marijuana, it impacts the way your brain functions. The whole thing it's a tragedy for all of us, because a lot of those are very capable young people, or were very capable young people, who are now no longer capable. It's really sad.
It's very, very sad. I want to ask you now about success, because in your book, you describe different kinds of success, different ways. So many parents of adult children just want their kids to be successful. And sometimes it starts, we talked about that admission scandal. They think success is getting into Stanford or getting into USC or whatever it might be that happened. What is success to you?
So I think success is having a career that you feel satisfied with, having relationships where you feel supported and you feel like you're part of a community, and enough money to be able to buy a house or live in a house and buy the clothes you need and take vacations and so forth. It does not mean you're a billionaire. It does not mean that you are, super powerful. It just means that you live the life you want and that you have enough of the essential needs. You can enjoy life. My life my husband was a professor of physics at Stanford. I was a teacher. We didn't have a lot of money. People in education don't earn a lot, but we had a really good life together. We had a lot of friends. We got to take vacations. We were not staying in the fancy hotels, but it doesn't matter, You can have a lot of great experiences in life without having all that money. What it also means to me is that the person who's earning money is earning it in a way where they feel satisfied in some way. They go to work every day and they're happy to go to work. They're not suffering. That, from my perspective, is success, because I've seen a lot of very, very wealthy people, billionaire types, and I would say that they're not a success because they're unhappy.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. As I've said to you before, our audience is parents of adult children, and you have, I think, 9 grandchildren. Is that right?
10.
10. Okay, I must have read an old article. I apologize. Any advice for grandparents? So a lot of our audience are probably grandparents. What role do they play that doesn't, of course, overstep the parents? So do they have a role? Can they be helpful, empowering? What can they do? What advice do you have for them?
So for grandparents in most cases are a blessing, because they can help relieve the children, their parents of the grandchildren, from a lot of things. They can take vacations with the kids. They can invite the kids to come over. They could do a lot of things to help. But one thing that is really important for grandparents to remember, just so they don't get into trouble, is don't tell the kids what to do. The adult kids, don't constantly be correcting them. Oh, you should have done this, or they should be wearing sweaters. They have to go to bed every night at 8:00, and you didn't tell them to do that. Because if you try to control the way that the parents are parenting, you will be cut out of their life. They'll limit you. You can come, come once a month, mom, type of thing. You don't want that to happen. You want to be able to interact with your children and your grandchildren freely, so it's fun. So that's the main thing that I would recommend. If you've already started doing the wrong thing and you're already excommunicated.
I wasn't going to ask that. I was going to ask something else, but okay.
No, but let me just tell you.
Okay.
Again, read the book and say, I have a new philosophy. I'm here to support you and to support my grandchildren. And you are in the driver's seat, and I will do what you say.
And what if you see things going awry? I mean, what if you watch one of your grandchildren and you see things? Should you tell your adult child or keep it to yourself?
I think it's best just to make the grandparents feel like you're doing what is important to you. I think you can tell the adult child, but don't tell them in front of their spouse. Don't tell them their friends. Try to do it at a meeting where it's not confrontational, or send an email and say, this is just an idea I have. Feel free to reject it. Just try to be as easy to get along with as possible.
Bite your tongue, just like my podcast.
Bite your tongue. Oh my God, that's such a great idea.
Okay, so let's skip to these family values trip. They worked with your children growing up, and you've mentioned them in other interviews. Well, you said this even earlier. You've been contacted by large corporations. Every relationship. I want to go through each one. So let's start with trust, and we're going to move to respect, independence, collaboration, right?
Yes.
Okay, so trust. How do you build trust with your adult children?
Hopefully you would have started when they were little.
Yeah.
But didn't start when they're little. Then you have to build trust by basically always being honest, never threatening something that you aren't going to carry out. That's one of the hardest things. Like, oh, I'm never going to go to the shopping center with you again. No, don't ever do that. You trust people who say what they're actually going to do, not what they are threatening to do. Respect and trust, they're sort of together. Respect basically means that you listen to the person. Doesn't mean you have to do what they're telling you to do, but you listen, you take their point of view into account. You don't trample all over them and their ideas. It's really important for you to treat, it's hard for parents, I understand. It's hard for you to treat them like they're equal. But when they're over 18, in the eyes of the law, they are equal to you. So
well, you're still paying for things then. I'm going to say they're not quite equal till they're earning their own keep.
Until 23, 24, 25.
I'm going to say they need to earn their own keep.
That's true. But still, it's best if they feel that you understand them and that you're supporting them and not like you're contradicting them. When there's a contradiction, that creates problems. No one wants to be the loser. That's where collaboration comes on. You want to collaborate with them in setting rules, setting boundaries. Because if you, just because you're like 60, you think you can control your kid just because like, oh, they're 30. They don't know what they're doing. I wish I would have known that when I was 30. That kind of thing. That doesn't work. They're going to not want to have your wonderful advice.
Well, and that goes to independence. I heard you in an interview say that was one of the key things when your kids were little. I think one of your daughters, I don't remember which one, was like a butterfly swimming champion in California or something, because you threw them in the water. You knew they could swim before they were even 1 year old. And this all goes to independence. So I want to hear independence a little bit.
So especially with small children, you want to give them independence. Let them dress themselves. Okay, if they're wearing the wrong colors, who cares? Or if their shoes are on backwards, it doesn't matter. You want to empower them to think that they can do it. They're independent. The way parents can encourage this is to, for example, have them do chores around the house. Those chores, little kids think those are important.
It's like they like homework in kindergarten.
They do. But, all the research shows that kids that are participants in the family that actually do chores, they succeed much better than other kids in life. Look up that research.
I will. And a lot of times parents say, I've heard this and I've heard it from listeners, I'm not going to have them do chores because I want them to spend their time in their studies so they can get into a good college.
No, that's the wrong attitude. They are going to get into a good college anyway. You have to do chores and then you have to go to work. Right? So what are you training them for? An unreal world. Honestly, they have to learn to do chores. They can make their bed. They can help clean up the dishes. They can actually cook. There's a lot of stuff they can do. Stop doing it for them. Everybody does chores for them. If you get a pet, a dog or a cat, they have to feed that pet. It's important. That's why pets are great, because they teach kids responsibility.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. You also said in the book that you made some mistakes.
Oh,
Can
I
you
did.
share some of those and what we can learn from them?
So I think my biggest mistake was that, and I think a lot of parents are probably doing it, when little kids eat, they make a giant mess. So when they're really little, there's nothing you can do from birth to one, maybe
Right.
1 to 2.
You put a mat under their high chair.
Put a mat under their high chair. But as they get older, they can learn not to make a mess. That's something you can teach them. It's like, I'm your mom and I don't make a big mess. And dad doesn't do that. And I don't take all my food and just shove it on the floor when I don't want to eat it. Well, somehow or other, I then had this idea that my kids weren't old enough to learn this, that they needed to be a little bit older to learn manners, eat politely, and all this stuff. So I made a big mistake on that. And so my kids never really learned these manners that they should have learned at the age they should have. They learned them late. It was more difficult. And the reason I finally found out is we moved to Geneva, Switzerland. We would go to restaurants with our kids, and our kids were the only ones crawling under the table, doing all sorts of bad things. And then I'd look around and these big families, French families, all the kids were sitting there politely waiting for the next course. It's like, God, how did that happen? and at first I thought, oh, it's just an unusual family. But then I saw it happen over and over again. So it's part of the culture. They teach their kids manners early, and those kids sit there and they have course 1, course 2, course 3. The French know how to do it, so they can do it. I can do it.
And they didn't have iPads, right? Everyone wasn't on the screen sitting at the dinner table, which is what I see all the time in restaurants now.
Right. So that's a big mistake. So don't make the mistake I made. It was not
good. Okay. You have these extremely successful daughters, and you're also a parent. Is your husband still alive? I'm not sure I know that.
No, he passed away in May this past year. He was 86.
I'm so sorry. I'm very sorry. I didn't read it anywhere, and it just dawned on me. I can't imagine being a parent to 3 successful daughters like this. I mean, over the top success. What was that like for you? And were there any struggles? Were you ever scared as they were taking these risks? What was it like?
It was a challenge, let me tell you. Let me tell you what they all did.
Okay.
They all picked their own college that they wanted to go to. Fortunately, they got in. And then they majored in whatever they wanted to major in.
You never had a say. You never said anything.
Susan majored in French and English, history and lit. Useful, yeah. Janet majored in international relations, and Anne majored in molecular biophysics and biochemistry. So I thought, well, there's one that looks a little more practical.
And you never said a word. You bit your tongue.
Never said a word.
Okay.
Never said a word. They all graduated. No one had a single job offer. None. And I never even thought that they should. I didn't know what to do. I didn't tell them. It was their life, right? They're doing it. So then Susan came home. She didn't know what to do. She's like, well, why did you major in French and English, history and lit? Well, I don't know. I liked it. Okay, well, whatever. She decided the next step for her was to go to India for a year. I was like, what? There was no internet, no way, no phone, none of this. She just flew off to India. She's like, I'll send you an aerogram, Mom. That was it.
I remember those.
Janet, not to be outdone.
Now they're supporting themselves at this point, though, right?
Supporting themselves. Oh, she got a job in India.
Okay.
She worked for India Today. I had no control, nothing. I didn't even know she got this job. She did it. Janet decided that she was really interested in African American affairs. She got a graduate degree in African American studies. I was like, what are you going to do with that, Janet?
Did you ask that?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did. And she's like, well, I really like it. It's like, that was the end of the conversation. Then Janet graduated and she decided she was going to go to South Africa by herself. Did you check South Africa yourself? See how safe it is?
Yeah.
Off she flew to South Africa. That was it. So I just want you to know, both of these were hair-raising experiences for me,
Right.
But I felt it was their life. They got to do what they wanted to do. I gave them all the skills that they should have. I taught them how to be independent, and they did. They did it. And then Anne, again, like Janet and Susan, only hers was different. She decided she was going to go on the Trans-Siberian Express all the way from Western Europe to China, and she did it. And she was gone for a year. She finally ran out of money, and I've forgotten which country it was, but she ran out of money. That was the only reason she decided to come home.
And did you always let them come back in the house when they came home?
Yeah, they came back in the house. They didn't stay long. Susan came back, and then she applied to a program at UC Santa Cruz and got in and moved there. Janet also moved. She came back and then moved out again quickly, about a month later, and did the same thing. They all did the same thing. When Anne came back, actually, Anne was the longest. She decided that she was going to be a babysitter. This was after spending a fortune going to Yale, right? I said, oh my God, I can't believe it. Anyway, she got a very good job babysitting.
Like a nanny kind of thing, full
Thing, full time. They paid a lot. And she did that for a while, about 2 months. And then finally, one day, she decided to go to a job fair. And she did. She went, and I don't know, she met some random person there. They invited her to New York for an interview. And she didn't really want to work. She just wanted to go to New York. So she accepted, and she went to New York. And then turns out it was a good interview, and she really liked the people. So that's how she quit babysitting.
Very interesting.
So, I let them lead their own lives and make their own decisions. After all, they're adults, and I didn't tell them what to do.
That's always a phrase in the podcast. They're adults now. It's something we all forget because we have been so entwined in their lives so closely. I want to ask 2 more quick questions. One of the biggest mistakes you say that parents make, and I am absolutely guilty of this, is to assume we are personally responsible for our children's emotions. And I think of that old adage, you're as happy as your least happy child. How do you advise parents of adult children to let go if their child is suffering? I mean, you went through a divorce with one of your girls, right? I don't know if more than one. I read about one. How do you let go of that emotion you feel when they're going through something so difficult?
It's hard. It's really hard. But you have to remember it's their life, and that there's nothing you can do. You can't take their place, and you can't do it for them. The only thing you can do is support them. Fortunately, the divorce was pretty nasty to start, but fortunately, it became amicable at a later point. But I had nothing to do with that either.
When they come for advice, do you offer it?
If they come for advice, I do offer it, but then I qualify it with, I don't want you to follow my advice just because, it's me. You should do what you think is the best, because nobody knows what the answer is. Nobody has a crystal ball. And even old people have lived through a lot. Your crystal ball is colored by the generation that you lived in. So it's very different today than it was, 20, 30, 40 years ago. And there's a lot of different pressures. So you cannot advise that way. It just doesn't work.
I agree with that so much. And I always say to my kids, and it makes me feel good that you say this, I can give you a suggestion, but the world's so different than it was when I was in it. So please don't take this as any final, think it through, because I have no idea. That's such a great piece of advice. Something I'm interested in, 36 years of teaching.
40.
Okay, I read an old article again. I'm sorry. 40 years of teaching. How have you seen the changes in the generation of students and families that's been positive and negative? What have you seen change over your 40 years of teaching?
It's dramatic. So what happened 40 years ago is that the kids were more in control of their own learning. And today they are not. The school sends home to the parents every time there's a test, the test result. Every school does it. It's part of Power School. It's part of all this stuff that runs the schools. That invades the students' privacy. So that makes parents get really upset for no reason, because it's really not their responsibility. It's the students' responsibility. The communication has improved a lot, and that communication has resulted in a lot more control of the students.
What do you mean by control of the students? What do you mean by that?
Telling them what to do.
So not empowering them to be independent.
No, but more so the parent always wants to know. Like, what's happening? What are they doing? Why aren't they wherever they're supposed to be? Oh my God, they got a C on a test. That's a tragedy. So there's a huge difference today. And then also, social media has had a huge impact. Students and how they feel about themselves. And I don't know.
Are your grandchildren on social media?
Oh, they were, but they're not now. They stopped. They realized on their own that they were feeling bad about themselves.
Yeah, interesting.
And they shut it down.
I worry about that so much. I don't know what I would do if I had kids today, that young people today.
What I did in class is I explained to them what the dangers of social media were. And then I said, now that you know, you need to make up your own mind, whether you want to do it or not. So I always involved my students in decisions. So the whole class was run collaboratively. To this day, they talk about how that class impacted their lives. So there's one other thing that I guess I wanted to mention.
Okay.
Part of my trick formula that we didn't talk about, and that's kindness.
Oh, yeah, kindness, the K, yep.
We need to remember the power of kindness. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. It's so impactful. Kids won't remember what you said or did, but they'll remember without any hesitation the feeling of kindness that they had at that particular time.
And that's true with adult kids too, don't you think?
That's true with all kids. It's true with all people. How you made them feel is what they remember. They don't remember the words. They remember the feeling. And so you don't want to make your kids feel disempowered or bad about themselves. And you don't want to do that to your grandchildren. I mean, no matter what they're doing, I think it's important for you to realize how kindness plays a huge role.
Thank you so much for bringing that. I am sorry I forgot that one because it's such an important one. Now we're going to close and I'm going to ask you, and you could have said it before, you can say it again. I like to end with 2 or 3 things that you really hope our listeners will take away from this episode.
Well, the number one thing I would like them to take away is if they could implement trick in their lives. That's number one. Number 2 is the first person that the adult people, need to forgive when they're thinking about what they did as parents is themselves. You did what you thought was best. It might not have been the best, but you have to forgive yourself. Don't beat yourself up for this. I guess the third thing is probably to remember that we're living in a really challenging world today. And the biggest challenge is you can't trust what you read. So it's really important for you to be up to date on what you read to make sure that it's really true. I would support the legitimate media. New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, those have real employees that are reporters.
They aren't AI.
They're not AI. They're not some crazy person who's posting something on X or Twitter. These are people that have done their research. So I'd support the local and the national media. And so those are my 3 things.
I can't thank you enough for this. When I told a couple people I was interviewing, they said, why would you talk to her? Hers is all about raising young kids. I said, because when I read that book, I could tell how so many of those things related to how we treat our adult children today. And we have a chance to change things and make a difference now. So I really appreciate this time.
Oh, you're welcome. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to help all these parents because I'm part of their generation too.
I know. Keep up the good work.
Okay.
So that's a wrap. I know some listeners might think, how can we relate to someone who has these amazingly brilliant, successful children? Well, after I listened, I felt that her advice went beyond that. I was particularly moved by the K in trick, kindness. We all know we may not remember what someone said, but we'll always remember how they made us feel. I want to thank once again Connie Gorant-Fisher, our audio engineer. This was a tough episode. I got a new computer and things just weren't working for this recording. I thought I'd done my homework beforehand, had it all set up, but it failed me. Please know that we really did get all new recording equipment thanks to all the donations or virtual cups of coffee. But because we record some episodes in advance, the new recording equipment won't even show up for a bit. But believe me, it's going to sound great. So thanks again to all of you who bought us those virtual cups of coffee and allowed us to buy some new equipment. Also, I should remind everyone, we do have a new co-host. I found one. It's going to be a big surprise, and her first episode as the full-time co-host of Bite Your Tongue will begin January 26th. We're going to do a great episode on the mother-daughter challenges. In the meantime, don't forget to follow us on social media and send us your ideas for episodes. Just email us at biteyourtonguepodcast@gmail.com. Have a wonderful holiday season. Set your boundaries. Remember that K in trick. And also, remember, sometimes you may have to bite your tongue.